Hi, everybody. My name is Marcus Johnson, and this is my lecture for early modern era between the 17th and the 19th century. To kind of give you guys a brief overview of what I'll be discussing in this lecture, first, I'll really speak of imperialism and global colonialism, primarily within European countries, was really one of the main pioneers when starting colonialism and imperialism. And then I'll jump into the scientific revolution and empiricism, where I really mention three individuals throughout this era and how their contributions really influenced the discipline and scientific initiation. And then finally, I would talk about pioneer geographical societies and how they influenced not only academic curriculums within different universities throughout the world, but also further exploration. Talking about the difference between imperialism and colonialism, there's one distinct factor between the two that really separates them, and that is through domination and subordination. And colonialism is the definition where uh, a country is establishing settlements in another geographical area that is not owned by them and typically not owned by anyone else. While imperialism is through domination and subordination of states over others. And this is primarily driven through military force, while colonialism is not. And both are really motivated by acquisition of land and resources in different strategic positions. But imperialism is done through different military efforts to take over a land that is not owned by them, but owned by somebody else. And when we speak on imperialism and colonialism, we can really look at three significant waves which took place during this time period. And these are just general, brief descriptions of each of the waves, but I'll further elaborate on each of these waves as the lecture continues. For wave one, it was really about exploring the new world to find new revenue and perpetuating European feudalism, as the second wave was really developing the mercantile capitalism system and different manufacturing. And the third wave really consisted of solidifying all capitalistic endeavors by providing new markets and different raw materials. And as I'm kind of going through each of these waves, I'll have this GIF or this video in the background kind of going through each of the colonial expansion through the dates of 1492 to 2007. And when we think about wave one of colonialism, we can really break it down to three motivations, which really prompted Europeans to further explore the world. Also known as the three G's: God, gold, and glory. For God, excuse me, missionaries felt it was really their moral duty to spread Christianity, as they really believed higher power would reward them for saving the souls of colonial subjects. And for gold, everyone loved gold. Colonizers really wanted to exploit different resources of other countries in order to really strengthen their own economies. And glory, Europeans had big heads, and so they would often compete with one another over the glory of attaining the greatest number of colonies. And throughout this really global colonial expansion, we can look at European colonies that really took initiation here, and that consisted of Portugal, Spain, and the early Ottoman Empire, also known as the Turkish Empire. Portuguese really started the long age of European colonialism with the conquest of Ceuta, Morocco. And this began in 1415, and the conquest and discovery of other African territories and island would also start the movement known as the Age of Discoveries. And the Ottoman conquered southern Eastern Europe, the Middle East, and much of the northern and eastern Africa between 1359 and 1653. Uh, and then we move into wave two, and throughout the second wave, these dates really consisted of between 1600 and 1708. And this is where European colonialism commenced with Britain's involvement in Asia, in support of the British East Indian Company. And this is where they really wanted to really further exploration of new materials, and they're using their involvement with Britain to really have much of Asia. And these countries really consisted of France, Portugal, and the Netherlands. For wave three, this is probably one of the most prominent during this era. And this was where the Conference of Berlin and British New Imperialism, quote unquote, also known as the Congo Conference, began. And this started in 1884, where many different countries, such as Austria, Belgium, Denmark, France, Germany, Great Britain, Italy, the Netherlands, Portugal, Russia, Spain, Sweden, Norway, Turkey, United States, scrambled for Africa. And of these four nations, France, Germany, Great Britain, and Portugal were really the main players in this conference, controlling most of the colonial Africa at this time. The conference didn't last very long. It was only a 3-month period, and it ended in 1885. And this is where colonial powers really negotiated over geometric boundaries in the interior of the continent. And this was really disregarding all the cultural and linguistic boundaries already established by the native indigenous African population. And this is where the imperialism really starts to play, as by 1900s, a significant part of Africa has been colonized by mainly 7 European powers, and that consisted of Britain, France, Germany, Belgium, Spain, and Portugal. You can really see on this map here, you can really see the expansion really start taking place after 1885, where it jumps to 1914 here, and it has a list of all these different European countries really colonizing within the African territory. This imperialism was really motivated by the search of raw materials within Africa, and this was used to find oil, ivory, rubber, palm oil, wood, cotton, and gum. Now we get into the second part of this lecture, where I speak on the scientific revolution. And the scientific revolution was a major turning point in how geography was viewed and studied throughout the world. And this shift in scientific research and literature was initiated by many people during this time period, but there were three that had a great impact on this transition. Immanuel Kant really had an impact, Alexander von Humboldt, and Charles Lyell. And before I want to get into these individuals, I want to take a moment and kind of explain how geography and the world was viewed during this time. In this quote by Bernard Cohen, he was a professor history of science at Harvard University, and he laid it out perfectly, explaining that traditionally knowledge has been based on faith and insight, on reason and revelation. The new sciences regard all of these ways of understanding nature and set up experience, experiment, and critical observation as a foundation and ultimate test of knowledge. This implied that women and men no longer had to believe what was said by eminent authorities, and they could put any statement to the test of controlled experience. And then we're going to move on to our first pioneer. This guy really had an impact in empiricism aspect of things rather than the scientific revolution, but he still had a huge impact on the discipline itself. He was notable for being one of the best German philosophers and geographers in the 18th century. He was a professor of logic and metaphysics at the University of Kongsberg, but this is where he's really played into geography, as he offered lectures on physical geography, and this really freed geography from the bond of theology, which is just the study of God itself. He believed that geography and anthropology together provide the knowledge of the world, an empirical ground for his thought, and he had a significant impact in that manner. His approach to geography was quite philosophical, as he really developed and advocates the doctrine of transcendental idealism, which is we have cognitive cognition only with the realm of experience. And objects within this realm, that is imperial objects, are really mind dependent. Um, he notes that the self connects these impressions and imposes an objective order on them. So experience is subject to priori laws, which is the knowledge that is acquired independently of a particular experience. And he finally arrives at the fact that space can be a subjective form of representation, and space reflects the nature of the knowing subject rather than the object known, and notes that space is a form of intuition. And this was quite significant because exploration could not be done by everybody, and the people back home were really able to rely on the explorer's interpretation rather than theirs. And so, as we talk about many times in this class, it is an act of experience that really gives us a true understanding of nature and where we are at. Uh, as we each have our own interpretation of different land, and so his idea here uh, really stood out, and he had a huge impact within that realm. Then move on to Alexander von Humboldt, and Humboldt was widely renowned in his time, and he indeed was regarded as one of the most eminent naturalistic scholars of the period, and the leading scientist statesman during that time. Uh, he was taught briefly, I think, in 1985 by Marcus Hertz, and Marcus Hertz was a student of Immanuel Kant. And in 1788, he set out to read Kant's works. And throughout this time, throughout this PowerPoint, you will kind of see how he aligned some of Kant's work to his. And in 1790, Alexander traveled along the Rhine into England with George Foster. And he took a lot of George Foster's opinion on scientific observation in the course of their travel and really emphasized his enthusiasm for further exploration, and which led to him in 1799. He set out for the New World. We spent 5 years traveling most of the Southern America and Central America, and his reports of his findings really made him a European celebrity. Then we touch base on a couple of his major principles that he kind of concluded with geography, and you can kind of see the resemblance that we get here through Alexander and Emmanuel's. He notes that measurements are of paramount importance and that measurements must be made of as many qualities of the environment as possible. The holistic and aesthetic sensibility must be present in one's summary, appreciation of, and report on landscape, and that geography is strictly about the compilation and synthesis of the present facts of the landscape. Moving on to Charles Lyell, and compared to the Alexander Emmanuel, as mentioned before, Charles Lyell was a geologist, and he was set out to prove that geological processes are due to natural events rather than supernatural events. And up until this time, the formation and process of Earth were attributed to God or another higher being. And this is where Charles Lyell found his evidence when studying Mount Etna in Italy. He returned to London in 1829 and wrote his most famous works called The Principles of Geology. And this is where in perhaps one of the most important ideas that came out the Principles of Geography book is his concept of uniformitarianism. And this is a theory that just states that all natural laws of the universe that are in existence now existed at the beginning of time, and all changes happen slowly over time and add up to larger changes. This really propelled the way of how geography was looked at. Instead of looking at it as a theology aspect, it was really the scientific literature that really took off from this point. And he had a great deal of this transition too, despite him not being a geographer, but a geologist. To kind of conclude the scientific revolution, we can kind of look at and know that experience is not transparent. It is more problematic. And we can see that by our observations are now commonly acknowledged and theory-laden, and do not give us quite the direct access to the world of discrete phenomena that has long been assumed. And this carried into where science itself soon became an immense cultural authority uh, within society. And through the scientific revolution and colonialism really prompted a great demand for information and knowledge about the world, really resulting in many different countries founding different geographical societies. And this is where, given geographic's valuable information to traders, investors, and statesmen, geographical societies were really used to aid commercial enterprises aimed at exploiting its resources and peoples. And governments became really involved in colonial ventures, annexing land beyond their frontiers, providing administrators and military protection, and also encouraging more settlement. And this further reached the world of academics, as geographical societies were really huge believers in furthering geography as an academic discipline. And here are just a couple examples of how different geographical societies in the past really played a role in really emphasizing the importance of academics within geography. In Russia, St. Petersburg, Imperial Russian Geographic Society promoted the discipline in a variety of ways, really establishing it as early Moscow State University. In Prussia, a royal decree in 1875 established professorships of geography in 10 different universities. So you can just tell by just these two alone that geographical societies are really pushing the way of academic curriculum within their schools. And here's just a couple of notable pioneer geographical societies within many different European and Northern American cities in the early 19th century. And this is where they would share different information amongst themselves and try to have further exploration for themselves so they have find new materials and just further expand their country. Uh, the first one started in Paris, and that was in 1821. Then came Berlin, 1828. London, St. Petersburg, and then New York City. Then here's just a couple of pictures I thought this was pretty cool to look at of some of the different geographic societies. I'm not sure if you guys will ever see it in this PowerPoint, but you can see my point of view, you can see different names such as Humboldt's. You can see Christopher Columbus right there, Marco Polo, all these pioneers within geography on the top of their buildings. So I thought that was pretty neat as well. And these are my references. I really appreciate you guys taking the time to listen to my lecture, and I hope you guys have a good one.